St. Michael's Cemetery should have been silent at that hour, a place where only the wind moved through the rows of ancient oaks, where dry leaves whispered underfoot, and where the stillness of names carved deep into cold stone held dominion. But as Caleb Walker, a one-time kingpin who had once made all of Charleston tremble, approached his daughter's grave, he heard something he never expected to hear again in this place. A small trembling sob so soft it sounded as if it feared being stolen away by the breeze. He stopped in his tracks. No bodyguards followed him. No engine idled nearby, only a child kneeling before Lily's headstone, his only daughter, the one he had loved more than his own life. Her small shoulders quivered in the cold wind. Tiny fingers traced the engraved letters on the marble, the way one might touch something long familiar. Caleb held his breath. For the past 3 months, he had been the only person to visit this grave. No one else knew precisely where Lily rested, least of all a child he had never seen. He stepped closer, each strike of his black shoes crushing the gravel soaked with evening mist. "Little one, why are you here?" he asked, his voice rough, low, shaken by confusion he could not mask. The girl, startled, wiped her tears quickly but did not run. Instead, she extended a crumpled sheet of paper smudged with dirt and wrapped carefully inside a torn plastic pouch. "I wrote this for her," she whispered, her voice thin as wind. "She promised to read it, but she never came back." Caleb went still. Lily had never said anything, not a single word about a letter, nothing about a child, no hint of a promise. His heart clenched, pounding against his ribs as the girl lifted her face. Those eyes. It wasn't just the shape, it was the light within them. That gaze. It held the same piercing sincerity as Lily's. And then she spoke 6 words that shattered the entire inner world of a man who had once feared nothing. "She promised to be my real mother." Caleb staggered back, feeling as though the earth itself tilted beneath him. A truth he believed buried with the coffin that day was now pushing through the cold soil, and nothing in his violent past or amassed power had prepared him for what came next. If you're still listening and feel that this story touches something inside you, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like, and share this video so we have the strength to bring more heartfelt stories every day. And if you don't mind, would you tell me where you're watching from? Leave a comment below. Let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every word you share. Caleb remained frozen before the grave as the girl pressed the letter into his hand, and it felt heavier than any weapon he had ever held. The paper was wrinkled, dampened slightly by mist, but the penciled lines remained bold, like the hoarse cries she had swallowed for far too long. He looked down at the first words. "Dear Miss Lily, my mother." And suddenly every sound around him faded, leaving only the heavy rhythm of his own heart. He had never known that words could hurt like this. The girl did not say anything more. She simply stood there, clutching the torn sleeve of her coat, her wide eyes fixed on his face, as though searching for anger, or disbelief, or mercy. He folded the letter carefully, so gently it startled even him, these hands more accustomed to breaking things than holding them tenderly. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice sinking lower. "Sophie," she answered, then hesitated before adding, "Sophie Bennett. But she said I could change it to Sophie Walker if I wanted. She said we would be a real family." Caleb felt something twist so sharply inside him that he almost gasped. Lily had never mentioned any of this. Not once in the countless hollow dinners after his wife died, not in a single rushed message or cut-off call. Sophie lowered her head, whispering as though afraid the world might punish her for speaking. She used to visit the center every week. She brought books and cookies. She read me fairy tales and told me about her garden at home, about the maple tree on the porch. She said when the papers were done I'd get to live there, with her father if he would say yes. Caleb's entire body sagged. He remembered the nights Lily came home late, claiming extra work at school, her eyes always carrying something he chose not to question. Now every detail he ignored became a piece of a larger picture, one everyone had seen except him. Sophie pulled a tiny zip bag from her old coat, revealing another letter. I wrote the first one when she said she'd come back for me. But she didn't. So I wrote this one too, in case she forgot about me. Caleb picked it up. The child's handwriting was clumsy but overflowing with longing hurt and a hope that refused to die. Miss Lily, I'm here. I was very good today. Can you see I brought the hair clip you gave me? I told Sarah that you're going to be my mom. Please don't forget me. I'll wait for you. He inhaled deeply, fighting the sting rising in his eyes. For years he had built his empire with blood, with iron rules, with the fear he commanded. But he had never felt as powerless as he did now, standing before a child who had just lost her mother for the second time. Sophie looked up at him, her gaze brave yet trembling. I know she would never leave me on purpose. But I'm scared. I'm scared they'll send me somewhere else, and then I'll be forgotten again. I want to read my letter to her, but I'm afraid I'll cry. Caleb knelt his knees, touching the cold ground, and set his solid hands on her small shoulders. Then read it, he murmured, his voice hoarse. She's listening. Sophie nodded, unfolded the worn letter, and began to read, her voice small but clear. Caleb did not catch every word because his heart was roaring with feelings he had never known how to name. Pain, blame, and a fear deeper than any he'd endured that he had never truly known his daughter until it was too late. When Sophie finished, she stared at the headstone as though waiting for some miracle. But only cold wind and falling leaves answered her. Caleb rose, folded the letter, and slipped it carefully into his coat. Are you cold? He asked. Sophie shook her head, but a tiny sob betrayed her. Caleb removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. You don't have to wait alone anymore. She looked up at him, eyes wet, disbelief flickering through them. And Caleb knew in that moment that there was no turning back. He held Sophie's small hand lightly as they walked out of the lonely cemetery, his steps crunching over gravel like aftershocks of an inner earthquake. Neither spoke. Only the wind hissed through the trees, and the soft clink of buttons echoed from the oversized coat around her. When they reached the black car parked near the old iron gate, Sophie tilted her head up at him, her gaze piercing the mask he had worn for decades, to hide the part of him that once knew how to ache. You're Miss Lily's father, aren't you? She asked gently, as though afraid the answer might break her. Caleb nodded, the ache in his throat too tight for words. You look like her, he whispered after a moment, lowering himself so their eyes met. Her eyes held the same quiet old soul depth Lily had as a child when she begged him to tell again and again the story of the talking fox her mother once told. But in Sophie's eyes, there lived something more, a thin, trembling fear, the kind carried by a child who has learned loss too early and too often. People at the center said I shouldn't talk about her anymore, Sophie murmured, still watching him. They said she was just a volunteer, that she didn't have any ties, and that I should learn to forget. Anger simmered in him, slow and dangerous. He thought of people who could speak such cold, slicing words without understanding that sometimes a single tiny promise is the only thing that keeps a child alive through the night. You don't have to forget her, he said, and realized his voice had softened in a way he'd forgotten he could manage. You need to remember. As much as you can. Tell me everything you still remember. Sophie gave him a small smile, a fragile one held back by heavy memories. She liked peanut butter and banana sandwiches. She hated black coffee, but drank it anyway because she said grown-ups should pretend to be mature. She had a little moon necklace she only wore on rainy days, and she always carried a notebook with a fox on the cover where she wrote down the things that made her happy that day. Caleb stopped. He had seen that notebook. Lily had always written in it, and he had assumed it was private like all her journals. He had never touched it, never asked, never paid attention. She told me about you, Sophie continued, lifting her eyes to him, with a look that held him in place. She said you were strong and smart, and the only person she was ever truly afraid of disappointing. Caleb turned away, hiding the grief tightening around his chest like iron. Lily had feared him, not because he yelled or raged, but because he was always cold, always turning everything into something he needed to control, even emotion. He had never once said "I love you" to his daughter. He had believed protection through power and money was enough. She said, "Your eyes look like the sky before rain, always heavy," Sophie whispered, "and that if I ever met you, I just had to look straight into your eyes to know whether you hurt the same way I do." Caleb turned back to her, and in that moment he no longer saw a trembling orphan child, but a small soul holding the last living piece of his daughter's memory, warm and full of love. "You don't feel like a stranger," he said softly. "You feel like something I used to have, but lost long ago." Sophie bit her lip, gathering courage for a question too large for her tiny frame. Then, "Can I stay with you? Just for a while until you get tired of me." Caleb lowered himself until their eyes were level, no height, no distance between them. "I don't grow tired of people who remind me of Lily," he said, "and I don't turn away the child she loved." Sophie stood silent. A gust of wind lifted a few wet strands of hair from her forehead. Her eyes brightened just faintly, but enough for Caleb to know that the words he had spoken were not merely a promise, they were the beginning of something that would not allow him to walk away. Caleb brought Sophie home when night had fully fallen, the faint gold of the porch lights filtering through the misted windows of the Mercedes parked before the gates of the Walker estate. The tall black iron gates opened on their own, moving slowly, as though everything in this night understood that time needed to stretch just a little longer for the human heart to grasp something important. Sophie sat silent in the back seat, her small hands wrapped around the old canvas bag holding the few scattered belongings she had brought from the center. When the car stopped at the steps, Caleb stepped out first and opened the door for her. She looked up at the large house with its old red brick oak doors, high porch beams, and the hanging lantern that dated back to when his grandfather worked in the steel trade. "Will I get lost in here?" she asked, tilting her head. "If you do, just call my name." "I'll find you," Caleb answered, his hand resting lightly on her back, as if steadying both her and himself. They stepped inside the wide hallway, echoing cold and empty. Caleb realized how long he had lived inside this hollow shell. Since Lily's death, he had not once entered her room. The door had stayed closed as if he were keeping one piece of memory sealed away untouched. But tonight he opened it. The faint scent of wood polish and the perfume Lily used still lingered in the air. Everything was tidy, untouched, preserved exactly as the day she left. Sophie stood at the threshold, hesitant. "This was her room," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "You can sleep here if you want. But there's a guest room next door if that feels easier." Sophie stepped inside, her fingers brushing a wool scarf draped over a chair, her eyes pausing on a small bookshelf lined with children's books from fairy tales to simple science stories. "She read some of these to me," the girl murmured. "One time she brought The Giving Tree to the center and told me to keep it, but I didn't dare. I was afraid someone would take it." Caleb stopped short. "That book is here," he said, moving to the bottom drawer of the nightstand and pulling out a worn copy. Its spine cracked the cover, showing an old apple tree. Inside, tucked between yellowed pages, was a folded note. Lily's handwriting. Caleb opened it, his heart pounding with a weight that felt almost physical. "If you're reading this, it means you have found Sophie. Please believe me. She is not like other children. She is light. She is the last thing that made me feel I could still save something in this life. I promised her I would come back. But if for some reason I can't, please keep that promise for me. Don't let it be buried with me." Caleb could not read further. He folded the note carefully, shielding the tremor in his hands from Sophie. In all his years doing ruthless things, this was the first time he felt small beneath a plea. Sophie stood beside him, lifting her face. "You know," she whispered. "She said that if there's any place in this world called safe, it's where someone keeps a promise, even when the one who made it is gone." Caleb turned toward her, the look in her eyes tightening something deep inside him. They held expectation and fear all at once. He placed the book in her hands. "Keep it," he said quietly. "She chose it for you. It's time it belongs to you." Sophie hugged the book to her chest as though holding a piece of lily still warm. "Thank you," she breathed. Caleb didn't answer. He looked out the window where the garden lights cast a soft glow. Lily's promise was no longer just a piece of paper. It was standing before him, flesh and bone, a living heart that still trusted in something larger than loss. And he knew that if he didn't honor that promise, nothing he had ever built would mean anything. When Sophie finally fell asleep in Lily's room, clutching the book as though it were an invisible blanket of safety, Caleb closed the door gently and went straight to the attic. For years, that space had been nothing but dust and memories he never dared to touch. But tonight something pulled him there. Perhaps Sophie's eyes when she spoke of promises. Perhaps the note Lily left. Or perhaps the sudden painful understanding that he had lived under the illusion that he knew everything about his daughter. The dark wooden trunk rested in the corner, its rusty lock sealed its lid untouched. Caleb dragged it forward, his fingers tracing the edge as though seeking a lost part of himself. He opened it and the scent of old paper surged into the air. Notebooks, sealed envelopes, faded photographs, and an old phone he had never seen were stacked inside. He picked up a sky-blue notebook, its edges worn thin. The first page held Lily's unmistakable handwriting, small and slanted to the right. "Private notes not to be read unless I go missing or something happens that can't be explained." His heart clenched. He turned the page and began reading. Lily wrote about a little girl she had met at the shelter. "Her name is Sophie, 7 years old, eyes like someone who has lived many lives. At first I thought I cared for her the way I care for all the kids, but then she feels strangely familiar. Not in her looks, but in how she stays silent when she's hurt, how she pretends to be brave so others won't worry. I see myself in her." Caleb flipped through the pages, each one stirring something deeper inside him. Lily had not merely planned to adopt Sophie. She had investigated where the girl had lived, how many times she had been moved, what families she had stayed with. And then he reached a passage that made him pause for a long moment. "I'm not sure what I found is coincidence. Something is wrong at Sophie's old center. There's a supervisor with multiple complaints who never gets transferred. 3 children disappeared in 1 year, no files, no explanations. Sophie said they were taken away in a black car at night. She doesn't know more, only remembers the color and the sound of the door slamming." Caleb held his breath. His fingers tightened around the notebook. Lily had once told him she was working on a private project, something meaningful. He had dismissed it as youthful idealism. Now he understood. Lily had touched something no one wanted, uncovered a dark corner buried beneath a system meant to protect children. He reached for the old phone, powered it on. The battery still held enough life to display the last 4 missed calls, all from an unknown number, all on the day Lily died. No messages. But in the Notes app, he found a file titled "Do Not Delete." He opened it. The first line chilled him. "If I die, please protect Sophie. And don't trust anyone in uniform." He sank onto the wooden floor amid the scattered boxes of memory. He had heard countless threats in his life, witnessed betrayal, seen blood spilled for worthless reasons. But never had he imagined his daughter's death carried a secret weight enough to kill her. And worse, he had known none of it. Now before him lay the truth. No one had spoken the crack beneath the so-called accident, the silent plea Lily had written not with weapons or fear, but with love for a child no one wanted to remember. And Caleb understood that every word, every choice he made from this moment on would not be for Lily, who was gone, but for the part of her still alive inside Sophie's brave, unwavering eyes. When Caleb came down from the attic, dawn was near. The first rays of sunlight crept through the stained glass windows, casting a soft glow over the long hallway with its worn red carpet. He walked slowly as though afraid to disturb anything, especially the fear quietly rising inside him. Downstairs, the house was still silent. He poured himself a glass of cold water, But as he set it down on the kitchen counter, his phone vibrated once. A strange number. No name. No contact saved. One text message appeared. "We saw you at the cemetery. The girl is the one she chose, isn't she?" A chill ran along Caleb's spine. He didn't respond. A minute later, another message arrived. "Lily died because of her, and now you want to protect her? Don't be as foolish as your daughter." Caleb's hand closed hard around the phone, his eyes fixed on the screen. He typed quickly, "Who are you?" The third message came instantly. "Someone who knows what Lily did, and what you'll lose if you don't walk away." Caleb stood motionless in the kitchen, staring at the phone as though facing an invisible gun. Someone was watching him, knew where he had been, knew he brought Sophie home, and clearly this was more than a threat. He remembered the last line in Lily's note, "And don't trust anyone in uniform," as though someone had been watching them all along. He removed the SIM card, snapped it in half, and tossed it into the sink. The feeling of being surrounded was no longer a feeling, it was real, crawling under his skin, filling every corner of the house once thought safe. He went upstairs, opened Lily's door slightly. Sophie was still asleep, her tiny face creased with worry, as though even in dreams she couldn't find peace. Caleb sat beside the bed, eyes lingering on the small hand gripping the edge of the blanket. "They know," he whispered into the air, as if speaking to Lily. "They know about her, and about you." He rested his hand gently on Sophie's forehead, feeling the fragile warmth of her, a small flame in the dark. She was all that remained. A part of Lily, a part of the truth someone had tried to bury. But now the child was a target. There was no doubt, no time. Caleb stepped out, moving to the library at the end of the hall where he kept the things few people were allowed to touch. He opened the safe behind a painting and pulled out another phone, one only he and Vincent Caruso, his longtime lawyer and trusted confidant, had ever used in unofficial situations. He dialed. 2 rings. Caleb Vincent's sleep-roughened voice answered. "I need to see you this morning. Urgent. No one else can know." "What happened?" "They know about the girl. Someone is watching me. Maybe the entire system." Silence stretched for several seconds before Vincent replied, voice sinking low. 8 o'clock. The old office. I'll lock the door." Caleb ended the call, his eyes darkening. He had handled hundreds of threats, negotiated with killers, given orders without blinking. But this was different. This time he wasn't protecting an empire, he was protecting a child. And behind those ash-gray eyes lived everything Lily had tried to hold on to, everything she had risked her life to protect. He returned to his room, sat on the edge of the bed, and for a brief moment allowed himself to feel fear. Not fear of the unknown men, but fear because he understood all too well the people sending those messages were not bluffing. They acted. And if they knew Sophie was alive, if they believed she was a threat, nothing would stop them. Caleb lifted his head and looked at the photograph of Lily on the shelf. "I promised," he whispered. "I won't let it happen, even if I lose everything." Near 8 in the morning, Caleb parked in front of an old 3-story building tucked away in a narrow alley behind downtown Charleston. From the outside, it looked unremarkable, just another private law office among hundreds, but inside it had once been where he and Vincent Caruso handled matters that could never see daylight. Vincent was waiting at the door, dark circles under his eyes, a cup of hot coffee in hand, offering nothing more than a nod and a look that said, the trouble this time was bigger than anything they had faced before. They sat in a dim, wood-paneled room with the curtains drawn tight. Caleb placed Lily's note on the desk, along with the old phone containing her encrypted message. Vincent read through it, and his expression shifted the moment he reached the first line. "Don't trust anyone in uniform," he repeated, voice low as breath. She knew she was being watched. Caleb nodded and spoke slowly, each word deliberate, as though afraid the truth might fracture if touched too abruptly. "I need everything on the center where the girl lived. Every file. Who works there? Who runs it? Who funds it? and anyone ever named in a complaint. Vincent opened his laptop and typed in silence. Minutes later, the screen displayed a simple record that felt as cold as an unspoken verdict. St. Adelaide Children's Care Center, founded more than 2 decades ago by a non-profit called Haven South. Its board was led by a man named Douglas Merritt, and in the past 6 years there had been 5 complaints involving children who went missing or were relocated without clear explanation. All cases were dismissed for lack of evidence. Vincent glanced at Caleb, his voice dropping. The active manager when Sophie lived there was Barbara Lang. 3 anonymous reports mention her, all tied to children being taken out at night. Caleb gripped the arm of his chair. Is she still working there? Vincent nodded. Yes. And no one can touch her. The place is protected by a charity group called the Holden Foundation, led by Senator Marcus Holden. Caleb gave a short, humorless laugh. Politics, of course. Children's lives traded for campaign donations. Vincent tilted his head. What are you going to do? Caleb stood, shrugging into his coat. I need to go there. See it for myself. Lily might have missed something. Alone. No. I need you to do something. Contact a reporter you trust. Not someone from a big outlet. Someone who still values truth over ad revenue. Tell them to stand by. If I find even a single piece that can blow this open, I want it dragged into the light. Vincent hesitated, then nodded. And if you don't come back? Caleb held his gaze, eyes sharp, as an old blade buried too long in the ground. Then you know who gets that note. 20 minutes later, Caleb stopped at the gates of St. Adelaide. The building's cream-colored exterior and chest-high white fence made it look like a peaceful preschool, but he knew that behind that facade lay something Lily had risked her life to uncover. A young staff member stepped out to greet him, freezing when he said his name. I'm Caleb Walker. I'm here to ask about a child who used to live here, Sophie Bennett. The girl stiffened at once, her voice shrinking. I'll have to ask the manager. Please wait here. Caleb watched her disappear behind the door, then scanned the grounds. Cameras in every corner. A small delivery truck with a food service logo parked behind the building. A guard in uniform standing off to the side but without a radio on his belt. Something felt wrong. Everything was too polished, too quiet, like a stage arranged to hide something rotting beneath. And Caleb knew the truth he sought wouldn't be in the files or the rehearsed answers of people trained to lie. It was in the small inconsistencies, the flickers of fear, the silences that stretched too long. This time he wouldn't miss a single sign. He left St. Adelaide with the feeling of having stepped out of a smoke-filled room where breathing had become impossible. Barbara Lang never appeared, citing an emergency meeting and telling him to return later if he wanted an official conversation. The other employees responded as though reciting from a script. Sophie lived here, nothing unusual happened. All documents were legal and no incidents were recorded in her file. Caleb didn't believe a word. Their eyes darted away. Their sentences repeated themselves, and the emptiness in the children's eyes as he passed the playground chilled him. They were not eyes raised in love. They were eyes of small souls accustomed to being forgotten. Back in the car, Caleb called Vincent. Nothing. Everything is clean in a way that feels wrong. Vincent answered curtly. I'll dig more. We may need another angle. Did Sophie leave anything behind? Something Lily gave her. Caleb froze. The night before leaving Lily's room, he remembered Sophie mentioning something she always kept with her. A small box shaped like a fox. Lily had given it to her, with instructions to open it only when truly necessary. Caleb drove home faster than the limit allowed. As soon as he entered, he saw Sophie curled on the sofa with a pillow in her lap and a book open in front of her. He watched her for a moment, her hair messy, clothes a bit untidy, but her face calmer than the night before. Sophie, he called softly, do you still have the box Lily gave you? She blinked, then nodded, slipped into her room and returned with a small hexagonal wooden box carved with a fox curled in sleep. She said not to give it to anyone. But you're her father, so... That's okay, she said, offering it with both hands as though handing over a treasure. Caleb opened the lid. Inside, cushioned by thin velvet, was a black USB drive. No label, no markings. Just an ordinary object that suddenly felt like the heart of everything Lily had died protecting. He plugged it into his laptop, using an encryption program Vincent had installed for him years ago. The first folder held files named only by dates. Videos, images, notes. The first video loaded a shaky covert recording showing a man in a suit signing a document in a room lined with files. He spoke into his phone. "Shipment of a dozen will go out tomorrow night. No leaks, no mistakes." His voice was dry, emotionless. Caleb paused, pulse thundering. He opened an audio file. Lily's voice small but steady. "The girl's name is Sophie. She almost got taken, but they changed supervisors at the last minute. I'm trying to track the others. If I don't make it back, Dad, please believe me. This is proof." Other files showed photos of documents, lists of names, identification numbers, routes, dates, even truck plates. Lily had cataloged everything with the precision of someone who knew she might never get the chance to testify. Caleb sat frozen. He had heard stories of trafficking, of missing children, but never imagined it would reach his doorstep. It had taken Lily's life, and it had nearly taken Sophie's. He looked at the little girl who sat quietly now, sensing the shift in the air. "Sophie," he said gently, "do you know why Lily kept this box so carefully?" She shook her head, eyes searching his. Caleb rested a hand on her shoulder. "Because she believed that one day, you would be the reason the truth came out." Sophie said nothing. A single tear slipped from the corner of her right eye. Caleb didn't wipe it away. It wasn't just a child's tear. It was the truth resurfacing after years buried in silence. And from this moment forward, he knew he was no longer just keeping a promise to his daughter. He was the last one left to protect the legacy she died to leave behind. Caleb sat alone in his dim office, the only light coming from the laptop casting a weary glow across his aging face. Each time he hovered the cursor over a new file, another wave of shock rose like an unstoppable tide. Every note, video, and photograph Lily stored carried the breath of someone who was no longer a student, nor a young woman dreaming of her future, nor the fragile child he once held when she was born. She was someone risking her life against a rotting system. In one heavily encrypted audio recording, Caleb heard the voice of a man, hoarse, controlled with the professional cadence he recognized from military or federal agents. "The target has infiltrated St. Adelaide's internal operations. She may access the transport list and identify destinations. We don't know who she is yet, but she's coordinating with Agent Wells of the Bureau. All evidence will be sent to the regional office." Caleb froze, replaying that segment 3 times. Agent Wells, the Bureau. Lily had not worked alone. She had worked with federal agents. His daughter had been an informant. She had been undercover. He went still. Every small detail he had brushed aside. Lily claiming she had late classes, the nights she returned home with no explanation, the phone calls cut abruptly when he entered the room, now aligned like a perfect sequence. He had thought she was falling in love, but she had been trying to save lives. Caleb opened another clip, footage from a hidden camera, jerky fast, like someone moving quickly. Breathless audio. Lily, whispering into a mic, "I'm following a van leaving the loading area behind the center. The plate matches last month's list. There are 3 kids inside, I saw them through the curtain. I'm sending my location. If I don't make it back, my father is Caleb Walker. Tell him I didn't abandon him. I just couldn't close my eyes." Caleb lifted a trembling hand to cover his face. His chest tightened, not with guilt alone, but with a devastating grief that had no sound. His daughter had lived a second life, secret, dangerous, and he who once believed he protected her from every threat had known nothing. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph, Lily at 16, standing beside the car he gifted her, holding up her honor roll certificate with a bright smile. That smile now held different meaning, no longer just innocence, but a courage he had failed to see. Caleb called Vincent. His voice was low, resolute. "I want everything on Agent Wells, rank records, last contact. And I want to know why no one told me the Bureau lost someone in a trafficking investigation." Vincent sighed. "Are you sure about this?" "Caleb, if Lily worked with them, they may be the ones hiding her involvement. She was the only one who dared look this darkness in the eye. And now I'm the only one left to finish what she started. They will answer." Caleb ended the call and stood. Outside, the sky had deepened into night streetlights reflecting in the window like watching eyes. He turned to Sophie, who sat folding origami cranes with small, careful hands. She looked up when she sensed him, offering a faint smile. Those eyes, Lily's eyes, but now they did more than remind him. They were the flame urging him forward. Lily had not died in an accident. She had been silenced for knowing too much. And Sophie, the girl Lily loved as her own, was the last living piece worth protecting. Caleb knelt beside her and took her hand. "From now on," he said softly, "you don't have to hide anymore. You can tell me everything you remember. You don't have to be afraid." Sophie blinked, then whispered, "You'll believe me." Caleb looked into her trusting eyes where Lily's spirit still lived. "I will," he said, "more than anything." Caleb tightened his shoelaces, each motion slow and deliberate, as if his body needed time to catch up with the storm roaring in his mind. The house had fallen into silence now, with only a faint glow from the living room filtering through the hallway, casting his shadow long across the wooden floor. In the pocket of his coat, the hard drive holding the truth about Lily and the entire trafficking network lay still like a bomb waiting to detonate. He turned towards Sophie's room, where the door sat slightly ajar, and a warm sliver of light spilled from her night lamp. She was still awake. Caleb stepped inside quietly. Sophie sat propped against a pillow, clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit whose torn ear dangled loosely. Her eyes were open but unfocused, as if she were suspended between two worlds, the present and an old memory he could never touch. He sat down at the edge of the bed, his voice lowering into a gentleness he never knew he possessed. "Sophie, do you want to stay here with me? Stay for good and never go back to that center?" She didn't answer at once. She searched his eyes as though trying to determine whether his promise was truly safe, truly real. After a long moment, she gave a small nod. But then she whispered, her voice so faint, Caleb had to lean in to hear it. "But they said I'm cursed. That anyone who loves me, something bad will happen to them." The sentence struck him like a hand closing around his heart. That was not something a 7-year-old should ever believe. It was the belief of a soul carved by loss so deep, it had begun to think it was the cause of its own suffering. He held her trembling hand gently in his, lifting his gaze with a light he rarely let himself feel, unconditional compassion. "You are not cursed, Sophie. You are loved. By your mother, by Lily, and now by me. They didn't leave because of you. They left trying to protect you. You survived, and that's not a curse. That's a reason to fight." Sophie bit her lip, tears swelling in her eyes. "But if I stay here, they'll come again. They'll hurt you." Caleb gave her a faint smile. "They'll have to get through me first, and I don't fall easily." He stood, reached for the small coat hanging near the door, draped it over her shoulders and lifted her into his arms. She didn't resist, her arms looped around his neck as though for the first time in her life someone was truly carrying her away from fear. "I'm taking you somewhere else, somewhere safer. But from now on, you're not someone nobody wants. You are Caleb Walker's granddaughter, and no one is allowed to touch you." Sophie rested her head on his shoulder, her stuffed rabbit dangling limply from her hand. Outside, the wind rose, shaking the dry branches. Caleb crossed the hallway and stepped into the night. Darkness stretched before him, deep and threatening. But with Sophie in his arms, it no longer made him hesitate. For the first time since Lily's death, he wasn't living only for vengeance. He was living to protect. And he would not let history repeat itself. Caleb drove through the night with both hands locked around the steering wheel, as if he could snap it in two. Sophie slept in the back seat, swallowed in his oversized coat, her head against the window, the stuffed rabbit clutched tightly to her chest. Outside, the empty streets slid past like fragments of old memories, shadows and lies. He couldn't take her back to the mansion, nor remain in the safe house. Their watchers knew about Sophie now, and Caleb would not risk her again. He needed someone he once trusted. Sergeant Nolan Briggs had been the man Caleb owed from a decade-old case. Back then, Briggs had been a young officer still believing in justice, but realistic enough to know that not every victim was saved by the law. Caleb had helped him rescue his sister from a drug trafficker using a method no court would ever approve. They had not spoken since, but tonight Caleb called, and Briggs answered. The outpost in the Southbridge outskirts was a small cabin tucked in the woods, where local officers rested between shifts or handled paperwork away from the public eye. When Caleb pulled up, the porch light flicked on. Briggs stepped out with a hand resting casually near the gun holstered at his hip. When he saw the child in Caleb's arms, he frowned. "I don't take in lost kids." Caleb's mouth twitched with dry irony. "She's my granddaughter, and she's in danger. I need you to run some checks off the system." Briggs glanced at sleeping Sophie. "This about Lily Walker?" Caleb nodded, then opened the trunk and pulled out a stack of files from the hard drive. "I need to know if anyone in your force has been near St. Adelaide or the warehouses tied to international human transport routes. There's one name I need confirmed: Deputy Commander Harold Kent." Briggs frowned deeper, taking the documents. "You're telling me this man is in the force? He appears in a recording Lily saved." "Clear as day. He's protecting the transport routes and burying information about the victims." Briggs didn't reply, simply led them inside. Sophie was placed on a long bench to sleep, while Caleb paced the small room like a caged animal. Half an hour later, Briggs stepped out of the office looking pale. "You were right. Harold Kent has financial ties to a private group called Nouveaucorps, a front for multiple shell corporations. But it's worse." Briggs paused to breathe. "Kent is currently the head of the special task force assigned to clarify Lily's death." Caleb stopped dead. "He's investigating himself." Briggs nodded grimly. "He's smart. He planted his people inside the task force, burned every file, and convinced the Bureau that Lily's death was an accident." Caleb felt the blood thrum in his ears. He wanted to shout, "Break something, turn the world upside down." But then he looked at Sophie sleeping peacefully, and his rage cooled into something sharper, colder. He needed clarity. Briggs met his eyes. "I'll help you. But if Kent realizes I access the system, I could lose my job. Or disappear." Caleb looked at him steadily. "I'm not asking for sacrifice. I'm asking for truth." Briggs nodded slowly, lowering his voice. "There's a place you can take her. One of the shelters we never registered. I once used it to protect a child witness in a molestation case. It's hidden well." Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder. "You just saved a child's life. And brought me closer to the man who killed my daughter." Briggs gripped his hand. "Be careful with Kent. He's not the kind who wears a badge for honor. He wears it like armor so he can kill without suspicion." As Caleb left the outpost with Sophie in his arms, he knew the circle was closing. The man who murdered his daughter was no longer faceless. He had a name. He had power. And he carried a gun backed by the law. But now he also had an enemy walking toward him step by steady step, carrying Lily's eyes in his memory and a past that refused to stay buried. The safe house lay deep in the mountains of western North Carolina, nearly half an hour from the nearest paved road, accessible only through winding bends and dense forest. From the outside, it looked like an old two-story wooden cabin with weathered shingles and a porch faded by time. But inside, it was equipped with an internal alarm system, reinforced doors, double-layered windows, and a signal jammer. It had once sheltered a witness in a Mafia trial nearly a decade earlier, and had since been erased from official records. Caleb set Sophie on the small bunk bed in a room overlooking the pine woods. She held her stuffed rabbit tight, her cautious eyes scanning the unfamiliar space. The silence was thick enough to press on the chest, and Caleb knew this peace wouldn't last long. He checked the cameras, reset the entry codes, then returned to find Sophie sitting cross-legged, her expression distant with a thought she had carried for too long. "Mr. Caleb," she said softly, barely above a breath, I think. I remembered something from a long time ago, but I was too scared to say it. Caleb sat across from her, his gaze gentle. "You can tell me anything, Sophie. It's safe here." She swallowed, her hands clasped tightly. "I remember that night. The night my mom was taken. It wasn't an accident. They found where we were hiding and they came fast." Caleb stayed still, letting her continue. "My mom told me to hide in the closet. I could only look through the crack. I didn't see their faces, but I heard them." Sophie shut her eyes, searching her memory. One man had a slow, cold voice. He said my mom owed a statement she hadn't delivered. Another man asked where the girl was. My mom screamed that I didn't know anything, that I was just a child. Her voice trembled as tears glimmered. Then my mom cried. It was the first and last time I ever heard her cry. I heard a gunshot. Just one. Then silence. Caleb's fist tightened, but he didn't speak. Then I heard another man. He said, "It's done. Keeping the girl isn't safe. Put her through the system." Sophie opened her eyes, looking at him with a mixture of fear and certainty. "They took me to St. Adelaide. They said I was abandoned, but I know my mom would never leave me." Caleb nodded slowly. "You're right. She was a victim. They killed her to seal the trail. But they never expected a child to remember." Sophie shivered. "One of them smelled like Lily, like her perfume. I didn't understand then, but later I thought, maybe Lily met them before. Or investigated them." Caleb inhaled sharply. Every detail Sophie spoke slid perfectly into place. Lily had followed the trail, starting from Sophie and her mother, and uncovered a network far larger than he ever imagined. And more terrifying, Lily may have known she wouldn't live long enough to reveal the truth herself. "There's something else," Sophie whispered, reaching into her backpack. She pulled out a small necklace. "Lily gave me this. I never opened it. She said to keep it safe because what's inside will save you someday." Caleb took it. The pendant was a micro USB drive. He glanced at the signal jammer, then carried it to the desk and plugged it into the laptop. The screen blinked before revealing a single folder labeled in capital letters, "Not an accident." Inside was a video, a grainy recording. Lily sat in front of the camera, dark circles hollowing her eyes from exhaustion, her voice shaking, but unmistakably clear. "If someone is watching this, it means I'm dead." Caleb felt his heartbeat slow, heavy. He looked at Sophie, clinging to his arm, her wide eyes unmoving. Lily continued in the video, naming specific individuals, outlining the trafficking network, listing officers and officials involved. What she gathered could burn an entire system to the ground. Caleb turned the video off, his eyes burning red. He pulled Sophie into his arms. "You've kept what the world needs to know. You are the last light Lily left behind." In the mountain safe house, surrounded by cold wind and silent trees, a truth had just been brought into the open. And with it, a battle that could no longer wait. At dawn, with fog still clinging thickly to the treetops surrounding the safe house, Caleb sat quietly at the wooden table, his eyes fixed on the computer screen. He had replayed Lily's video 5 times, every word etched deeper into his memory. He wrote down everything: the timestamps, the locations, the names. Even the subtle shift in Lily's expression when she mentioned a name. She never got to finish before the recording was interrupted by the sound of something striking off camera. It meant one thing: she had been watched, even as she filmed her final message. Sophie had fallen asleep in the armchair nearby, her stuffed rabbit lying on the floor, slumped like a worn-out night watchman. Caleb glanced at her, then returned to the analysis he had begun, sketching in marker, across the windowpane, maps of war disguised as scribbles. One name repeated itself through every clue: Ivan Petrov. The Russian's name surfaced in illicit financial reports, underground trafficking records, and a blurry photograph captured in the video Lily had taken in an abandoned warehouse. In the image, a tall, heavily tattooed man leaned over to whisper into the ear of a police officer, and on his right hand, Caleb saw a red ring embossed with the head of a serpent. He had dismissed it at first as a strange piece of jewelry. But when he slowed the video again and zoomed in on the man's neck, he nearly dropped his coffee. A long scar curved like the severed body of a snake. That was no coincidence. In the old FBI archives Caleb had once accessed through underground exchanges, there was only one man with that mark, Ivan Petrov, known as the Shadow of Eastern Europe, a trafficker of women and children whose market fed the darkest corners of the world. He was not merely a broker of human misery, he was a handler, the man who silenced witnesses in ways that left no trace. Caleb shot up from his seat and called Vincent. The loyal lawyer answered after the third ring, voice groggy, yet alert. Caleb issued the order bluntly. I need everything you have on Petrov. What you kept hidden. What the FBI collected, even the files that never made it to the public. Vincent hesitated. Are you sure Petrov is another level entirely? He has political protection, military shielding, he's been seen at private events with the governor. Caleb replied, his voice cold as steel. He killed my daughter, and he put Sophie's mother on the purge list. I'm not asking for justice, Vincent. I'm asking for truth. Vincent exhaled heavily. I'll send everything within 2 hours. But Caleb, if you follow this to the end, you will be stepping into something bigger than the Mafia. Caleb hung up and turned to Sophie, who had curled in sleep from the cold. He pulled a blanket gently over her before returning to the files arriving one by one. One photograph pulled from airport security footage in Chicago 8 years earlier froze him in place. Ivan stood beside a young woman with long hair holding a newborn wrapped in cloth. The woman was Grace Bennett, Sophie's biological mother. Caleb read the note below. Subject: Grace Bennett was formerly one of the high-tier girls trained at the Kaliningrad refugee compound. Disappeared from the system when she became pregnant. Believed to have escaped with help from an unidentified internal employee. A chill washed through him. That unnamed insider could have been Lily. She had found Grace, helped her flee, and when Grace died, Lily took the responsibility of protecting the child. She never expected the truth to kill her first. Caleb stared again at the red serpent ring and felt dread coil under his ribs. It was not decoration, it was a mark that signaled allegiance to those who did not value human life. And now he understood this wasn't just vengeance. This was the last unfinished mission Lily had left behind. And to protect Sophie, Caleb Walker would have to face Ivan Petrov himself. Blood would be spilled. But this time blood would not be the cost, it would be the reckoning, and he was ready. According to the encrypted schedule Lily had saved, the Red Line transport was due to depart at 3:00 a.m. Caleb knew he had less than 20 minutes. He parked the car in a shadowed alley 2 blocks away. Turning to Sophie, he handed her his spare phone. Lock the doors, stay down. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, press the green button to call Mr. Vincent. Do not open this door for anyone but me. Sophie nodded, her eyes wide but steady. Caleb moved through the industrial yard like a ghost, avoiding the 2 guards patrolling the perimeter. He reached the rusted cargo truck identified in the files. The heavy padlock on the hatch wasn't locked, it was waiting. He slipped inside. Below deck the air reeked of diesel and fear. He didn't just find a random child, he found a staging area. A young girl, barely 8, was zip-tied to a metal chair, a piece of tape over her mouth waiting to be loaded into a crate. Caleb's rage flared, but he kept it cold. He cut her loose with his pocket knife. Quiet, he whispered. I'm getting you out. As he guided her up the steps, the heavy steel door above them creaked. A guard's shadow fell across the opening. Hey, who's down there? Caleb didn't hesitate. He shoved the girl behind a stack of crates and fired 2 precise shots not into the air, but into the hydraulic control box on the wall. The box sparked and exploded, plunging the room into darkness and jamming the lift mechanism. Amid the confusion and shouting, Caleb grabbed the girl and located the emergency maintenance ladder he had memorized from the blueprints. They burst out into the rainy night through a side vent. Alarms began to wail. Caleb scooped the girl up, sprinting back to the car as flashlights sliced through the rain behind them. He threw himself into the driver's seat, tires screeching as they peeled away just as the gate guards raised their rifles. It wasn't luck. It was a raid. Sophie clung to him, trembling, but safe. In the rearview mirror, the empty street stretched out like a throat swallowing the darkness they had escaped. Caleb didn't speak. He simply made a silent vow to Lily beneath the rain the truth could no longer be buried. And from this night on, every name, every face, every vacant gaze in the files would stand beneath the light. Back at the safe house, Caleb locked the rear door and tucked Sophie into bed, her old rabbit resting beside her, the lamp casting soft shadows across the wall, as though guarding the secrets of the night. He set the waterproof pack on the table, its contents spread beneath the dim desk lamp, lists of names, ages, caregiver codes, export dates, license plates. Many names matched those in Lily's files before her death. His hand trembled as he lifted each sheet, heart pounding, as if every line carved another wound into him. Nearby were financial receipts, maintenance fees, smudged, but legible enough to reveal the hierarchy. Large sums funneled through a charity called Quiet Haven Trust, then funneled to shell companies and transport firms before landing in an offshore account under an unfamiliar name. Handwritten beneath one page, "For Petrov, keep clean." Caleb stared hard. Petrov, his alias for international dealings, but this account was the artery feeding the entire network. He wiped sweat from his brow and opened another stack: transaction logs, transfer routes, arrival times, apartment addresses, warehouse codes, and a hidden location on the outskirts of Atlanta. One typed page read, "All secured. No leaks. Use discretion. Officers in uniform ready." The phrase repeated like an epitaph. On the next page, in tiny handwritten script, "Kent approved." Deputy Commander Harold Kent, the same man Briggs had warned him about. Caleb felt his chest jolt. The chain was complete. A video file played next, a partially erased recording, but still clear enough to catch a police officer's voice, cold and even. "The batch moves at 1200 hours. Same plates. No turning back. Petrov will handle the rest." Caleb replayed it, each loop searing deeper. The video showed a sealed metal container, a lock snapping shut, then a black truck rolling out under dull yellow yard lights. Dawn had not yet touched the horizon as it sped into the empty street. Caleb rose abruptly, fists clenched. He glanced at a small photograph of Lily, the steady eyes of his daughter staring back at him, burning with a plea for justice and protection. He placed his hand gently against the frame as though touching the promise she left behind. "If I die, please finish what I could not." The papers, the videos, the files, they were blood made visible, the cost of human lives smothered in silence. Caleb gathered them, placing everything into a waterproof case. He glanced toward Sophie sleeping peacefully, her face both fragile and resolute. "My sweet girl," he whispered. "They turned you into a commodity, a shadow. But I won't let them do it again." He stepped onto the porch, the weak yard light shimmering across the tin roof, the mountain wind whispering through the cracks of the old house. Caleb felt the weight of truth hanging before him, heavy and perilous, but he did not look away. He was no longer just keeping a promise to his daughter. He was answering the call of every breath stifled in the dark. The blood on those pages would soon become evidence. And when the moment came, the hidden men would stand in the full glare of daylight. The explosion struck at 3 o'clock in the morning, ripping apart the darkness with the furious roar of something almost demonic. The house on the quiet mountain woods was blown open from the front, the porch collapsing, windows shattering like falling rain smoke billowing into the air as alarms wailed through the night. Caleb had pushed Sophie into the safe basement less than 10 minutes earlier, right after receiving a call from an unfamiliar number. "We know you're hiding the girl. Next time, there will be no warning." This time they had chosen not to wait. When the dust settled and Sophie trembling was led out of the half-destroyed home, Caleb was left with nothing but the fire smoldering inside his chest. He knew this was a declaration of war. Everything he had uncovered in Lily's files, the videos, the documents, the evidence tying corrupted officers to a human trafficking ring, was no longer a threat on paper, but a blade pressed to their throats. And they responded the way any cornered animal does: they attacked. Sophie clung to him, eyes fixed on the flames behind them. Did I make the house blow up?" she whispered, her small voice cracking. Caleb knelt before her and held her shoulders. "No, Sophie. This is the fault of people terrified of what you know. But from now on, no one will touch you. No one." Minutes later, Vincent's car screeched to a stop on the wet pavement. He jumped out, pale-faced. "Good God! They actually did it!" he breathed. Caleb pulled him aside, handing him the hard drive and the waterproof case. "Take this. Secure it. Only open it if I'm dead." Vincent started to protest, but Caleb's look silenced him. "I'm not dying, unless dying means saving her." After the explosion, the Federal Bureau finally reached out. A female agent named Lauren Pierce visited Caleb at the local hospital where Sophie was being examined. Her eyes were sharp behind her pulled-back brown hair, her voice precise. "We need you to hand her over. She is a key witness. Her safety depends on the Witness Protection Program." Caleb crossed his arms. Cold eyes locked on hers. "Your system is what let her be hunted for 7 years. Your system let my daughter die without anyone knowing she was breaking your case open. I'm not handing Sophie over to anyone." Lauren didn't back down. "If you keep her, you're obstructing federal investigation." Caleb leaned forward and whispered low enough that only she heard it. "And if I hand her to the wrong person in your agency, she won't live until morning. Can you swear there are no rats in your organization?" Lauren went silent, her lashes lowering for a single beat. She knew he was right. He had every reason not to trust anyone. And she, even as an officer of the law, understood that the system she believed in had often hidden crimes behind the word procedure. At last, she said quietly, "I'll leave my personal number. When you're ready, call me. I'm the safest option you have right now. But don't wait too long. They don't sleep." That night, Sophie fell asleep in Caleb's arms on a narrow couch in a cheap hotel on the edge of another small town. He watched her breathe, then opened a recording from the archives. A high-ranking officer's voice snickered. "If that kid talks, the whole empire collapses. No one survives to testify." Caleb shut the phone, his eyes burning like coals. For him, threats were no longer warnings. They were invitations. And he was ready to answer, not with words, but with blood. At dawn, the cemetery lay beneath a pale veil of white, as if covered by a cloth meant to soften sins not yet forgiven. Caleb stood before his wife's grave, hands deep in his coat pockets, gray hair stirring in the cold morning wind. He didn't know what pulled him back here after everything, only that his feet returned him to where it all began, lost silence and questions no one ever answered. He placed a white lily on the weathered stone, his hand trembling. "I let our girl die without knowing what she was fighting for," he murmured, voice ragged. "And now the child she died to protect is being hunted the same way. I don't have many choices left, Emily. I don't have anyone left to trust." A voice spoke behind him, low and rough. "Still talking to the dead, aren't you?" Caleb turned. A man stood a few steps away, lines carved deep into his face, his heavy coat dusty from the road, eyes wary and road-worn. Caleb squinted, needing several seconds to place him. Logan Hart. He breathed the name, leaving him like a held-back exhale. "I thought you were dead. I thought you retired." Logan said, stepping closer, hands in his pockets. But when I saw your house got blown to hell in the middle of the night, I figured old ghosts were being called back. Caleb gave a weary half smile. What are you doing here watching you? From afar. Not to hurt, just to make sure you didn't do something stupid. And it looks like I arrived just in time. Logan had once been an undercover agent, the only person Caleb trusted during his final years in the system. But after a failed mission, Logan vanished, presumed dead. Caleb studied him for a long moment before handing him the small USB Lily once hid in her suitcase. She risked her life to get this. They killed her because she knew too much. And now they're hunting Sophie, the child Lily was going to adopt. Sophie is the key. She's the reason this entire trafficking network will fall. Logan took the USB, opened his tablet, and said nothing for several minutes. As the images and data appeared, his eyes darkened. Damn. These are transport lists, schedules, storage locations, and a recording of that high-ranking officer tied to Ivan Petrov. This isn't just a case. This could burn down half the political circle on the eastern seaboard. I need your help bringing this into the open, Caleb said, voice like iron. Public. Outside the system. I won't let them drag Sophie into legal machinery full of traitors. Logan looked at him, hesitation and understanding fighting behind his eyes. You're sure going public means war? There's no going back. I'm too old to go back, Caleb said quietly, eyes fixed on the cold grave. I let my daughter die in the dark. I won't let my granddaughter die in silence. Logan nodded. Then we start at Dock 47, where they once moved their biggest shipment. I still have someone in port security. We can stage something big enough to flush them out. But we need bait. Caleb didn't hesitate. I'll be the bait. Just make sure Sophie is safe. I'll take her somewhere even the devil can't find. Logan promised. Two men, one a former criminal, one a former agent, now stood on the same side, bound by a child, a name and a promise. The wind swept through the cemetery cold as prophecy signaling the final storm ahead. But this time Caleb felt no fear. He had a mission, and a ghost from the past had returned to help him finish it. Night swallowed the sounds at Dock 47. Containers towered like black monoliths, the dim yellow of a few old lamps washing across puddles left from an earlier rain. Caleb stood in the open space, hands in his long coat pockets, the loaded pistol hidden beneath. Logan's morning warning echoed in his ears. Stay calm, do nothing until the signal. We need them to talk. The space before him was silent, but he knew unseen rifles were pointed at his chest. His phone buzzed. A single message. Alone. Step forward. He moved, each step heavy over the wet ground. He reached the designated spot. Within seconds, a black van rolled in without headlights. The back doors opened, revealing three men inside. The tallest stepped out, shaved head, a long scar down his neck, a red stone ring glinting on his finger. Ivan Petrov. Caleb met his gaze without flinching. Ivan smirked. You're punctual. I admire punctual people. And even more, those who stay silent. And I admire men who keep their promises, Caleb replied, eyes flicking to Sophie inside the van, bound, her mouth taped. Her eyes widened when she saw him, fear turning into hope. Let her go, Caleb said, voice low, pulled from somewhere deep in him. Ivan stepped closer. Not too near, not too far. You know how this works, Caleb. I need assurance. You give me everything Lily had, the hard drive, the recordings, the documents, and the girl lives. If not... He jerked his head, and one of his men ran a blade through Sophie's hair, making her shrink back. Caleb clenched his teeth and pulled a USB from his coat. It's all here. But before I hand it over, I want to know, who's backing you? Ivan laughed softly. Don't be foolish. Knowing more only shortens your life. Be grateful I'm offering you a choice. Caleb nodded, tapping his wristwatch. A silent signal shot outward. In a distant container, Logan and two former agents began live streaming the encounter through the camera hidden on Caleb. Audio-video. Ivan's face, Sophie's captivity, everything streamed to a secure server. "I'll give it to you," Caleb said, stepping closer, then throwing the USB toward him. A guard grabbed it, plugged it into a laptop. Lines of data filled the screen. Ivan paused, surprised. "Really, no tricks?" Caleb gave a tired smile. "I'm done with tricks. I just want the girl alive." Ivan signaled his men to free Sophie. She bolted toward Caleb, wrapping her arms around him. But before he could lift her, an explosion ripped through the far left side of the dock. A container erupted in flames. Ivan cursed. Logan shouted through the comms, "Plan B, pull back." Someone else planted that bomb. In the chaotic moment, Caleb dragged Sophie behind him, shielding her. Ivan fired wildly, but it was too late. From 4 directions, a tactical team stormed in, floodlights blasting the dock with white glare. Ivan was pinned beneath rifles, his face drained of color. "You trapped me," he snarled. Caleb stepped forward, staring straight into his eyes. "No, you trapped yourself. And this time you can't buy your way out. Everything was broadcast. Even the man protecting you is on television this very moment, trying to deny you. The game is over." Sophie clutched Caleb's hand, trembling. "It's done," he whispered to her. "We don't have to run anymore." In the blaze of lights and the thunder of helicopters overhead, Caleb looked around the dock, the place where he nearly lost everything again. But this time, he had won. Not by bullets, not by violence, but by truth. In the federal interrogation room the next morning, Ivan Petrov sat motionless, staring blankly at the wall. 2 agents circled him like silent predators, but he offered no confession. Behind the one-way glass, Caleb watched, gripping a cold cup of coffee. He didn't care if Ivan talked. What mattered was the domino effect set in motion. The entire dock encounter had been streamed into the Bureau's internal network and sent to independent investigative journalists via Logan's encrypted channels. Overnight, the data extracted from Caleb's USB was confirmed authentic, including recordings of Deputy Commander Harold Kent and several high-ranking officials. By morning, the media exploded with headlines: "Interstate trafficking ring tied to senior police, 7-year-old girl key to exposing network, former crime boss turns whistleblower." In a temporary office provided by the Bureau, Logan reviewed the footage again. "I've never seen reporters move that fast," he muttered. Half an hour after Kent's name was released, he slipped out the back of the precinct. 10 minutes later, they caught him at the airport with a one-way ticket to Argentina. Caleb nodded. They know they've lost. But they also know they can't die quietly. Someone will try to strike back. Logan turned to him, face grave. "Which is why I moved Sophie this morning. No one knows where she's going, not even you. She'll get a new name, a new passport, a new life. Absolute safety." Caleb swallowed, speaking softly. "She asked me why she had to leave me. I didn't know how to explain. I just told her that sometimes to protect someone you have to accept losing them first." Logan said nothing. He understood. In silent wars, the price is not always blood, it is often separation. Outside, reporters swarmed the building. Caleb Walker was no longer the name of a crime figure, but the man who toppled a hidden empire. Some of the guilty were still free, but arrests spread with every hour. And in a Justice Department conference room, a plan for a special investigative task force, first in 20 years, was being drafted. Caleb placed his hand on the tablet holding Lily's archived files. He opened a video, Lily, in a grainy frame, speaking to what seemed like a social worker. Her voice trembled, but stayed steady. "If anything happens to me, tell my father I didn't do this because I hated him. I did it so Sophie wouldn't become another version of me. I wanted her to have a life that doesn't cost blood." Caleb closed his eyes, a tear falling silently. Logan rested a hand on his shoulder. "There are more battles ahead, but this one was fatal to them. They can't hide anymore." "I know," Caleb whispered, "and I'm ready." Elsewhere. Sophie sat in the back of a small armored vehicle, a young female agent beside her. She gazed out at the fields gleaming beneath the morning sun. In her hands was a small note Lily had written. "One day you'll understand why I couldn't stay, but I promise you'll never have to be afraid again." Sophie folded the paper gently, holding it tight, as if it were a piece of memory itself. And at the end of that long road, Caleb knew he had kept his promise. Not to the world, but to his daughter. And to a vow no longer left unanswered. That morning, Caleb returned once more to the small hillside cemetery where rows of maple trees had turned the whole ridge into a sweep of deep autumn red. He walked slowly past the weathered stones, a bouquet of purple hydrangeas in his hand, Lily's favorite. There was no more wind howling through the branches, no shadows lurking at the edges of his vision, no threat circling him or Sophie. For the first time in a long time, everything felt still. He knelt before his daughter's grave, laying his palm against the cold, time-worn stone. "You lived a short life," he whispered, "but a brave one. I used to think I lost you long before you were gone, but now I know you found a path I never had the courage to walk, and because of you the truth came out. Dozens of other children will never have to live in the shadows again. Your death was not meaningless. You did what an entire system refused to face." A gentle breeze passed through, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves, soft, almost like a memory brushing against his cheek. Caleb closed his eyes, remembering the last time Lily stood before him, that steady gaze, that small, warm smile, and the promise she never had the chance to keep. Now the promise had been fulfilled in another way. Through Sophie, the little girl with the same eyes, the same flame of hope Lily once held on to. Somewhere far away, Sophie was beginning a new life, a new last name, a new school, a home where fear no longer slept in the walls. But in her heart, she held tight the memories of a sister, by love not blood, someone who cherished her as family, and a father figure who protected her with everything he had. In a secret drawer Sophie kept hidden, there was a single photograph of the three of them, the last piece of a world that had nearly been lost. Caleb rose to his feet, adjusting his coat, his eyes no longer burning with rage, only softened with a quiet, heavy peace. He had walked this entire journey, not for redemption, not for reputation, but for love. Love for a courageous daughter, and for a little girl carrying the unfinished dreams she left behind. If you've stayed with me to this moment, I want to ask you something. Did Lily's story touch your heart? Have you ever witnessed someone stand up for what's right, even knowing it might cost them everything? Have you ever thought about the price of truth and the people who carry that burden, so others won't have to? In a world full of noise and confusion, stories like Lily's and Sophie's remind us that sometimes all it takes is one brave person to make sure darkness isn't forever. Maybe you too are carrying something inside, something waiting to be spoken, remembered, or shared. If so, I would be honored if you left a comment below. Tell us what moved you. Tell us where you saw yourself in this journey. We truly want to listen, to feel, to connect with your heart. And if you enjoyed today's story, please subscribe to our channel, give this video a like, and share it with someone you care about. Every day we bring you heartfelt, meaningful, and honest stories so we can walk through life's emotions together. Thank you for being here with us. Wishing you good health, a peaceful life, and days filled with hope and quiet joy. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in the next video.